I thought, this is it. We're going to die on our honeymoon.
What you're seeing is not just an island, it's a ticking time bomb. Its name is White Island, located in New Zealand. With only a third of its cone protruding from the water, and one of its walls having fallen in, creating a sort of natural drawbridge. All it takes is a 90-minute boat ride, or a 20-minute helicopter ride, and you could be stepping off directly into the crater. The island has a definite menace to it, with the acrid air and the acid lake inside of an inner depression, and the abandoned sulfur mine where in 1914, 10 men were swept away to their deaths by a mud avalanche. When this mine closed in the 1930s, the island was largely forgotten about for several decades. Until the 1990s, when adventure tourism really started to heat up around the globe, and locals in New Zealand started taking advantage by offering boat rides and plane rides out to this kind of otherworldly volcano island. And soon, guidebooks were calling a tour of White Island an unmissable trip. Once on the island, tourists were taken on a very established route that started on the southern end of the island on a jetty. They'd walk up a dirt path, they'd go directly through the crater down to this inner depression where they could look over at this acid lake, and then they'd turn around and they'd walk right back, passing by the abandoned sulfur mine on their way back to the jetty. Tourists of all ages could complete this route in about an hour and a half. This volcano is very closely monitored by a geological monitoring service called GeoNet. Every day they rate the danger this island presents on a 0 to 5 scale, and tours are only allowed to take place if it's 0, 1, or 2. Anything above 2 is too dangerous. On November 19th, 2019, GeoNet rated the danger of the island as a 2, saying that it looks like an eruptive activity is more likely to happen, but the tourists were told nothing to worry about. Some of them didn't even knew about the level 2 warning. But that was part of the thrill of going out to White Island. It was like you're brushing up with death, but it feels really safe because the guides are out there with you and they're kind of joking about how it might erupt any day. You could be enveloped in an acid mist and obliterated by rocks, and people thought that was like kind of fun. And so when the rating was bumped up to a 2, suddenly people were more inclined to go. It was more exhilarating. Fast forward a few weeks to December 9th, the GeoNet rating is still at a 2, and 5 groups of tourists headed out that morning for White Island. You had 3 big groups that were in 3 separate boats, and you had 2 smaller groups that were in their own helicopter. They made their way out, and they arrived around 1 PM, and they began staggering tours up the path, down into the crater, down to the acid lake, and then back out again. By about 2 PM, 2 of the large groups that came in on boats had finished their tour, got back on their boats, and were ferrying around just offshore, taking pictures of the island, and one of the 2 helicopter groups had already boarded their helicopter and taken off. At 2:09 PM, 47 tourists and guides were still on the island. 26 were down near the jetty, waiting to board their boat to leave, and 21 were still deep inside of the crater. 1 minute later, at 2:10 PM, one of the cameras operated by GeoNet to measure what volcanic activity on the island snapped this picture of the 21 people down in the crater. Now, the image is not clear enough to make out individuals, but you can clearly see body shapes, and it looks like they are relaxed, walking in a straight line, making their way back to the jetty. For all but 3 of them, this would be the final picture of them taken alive. 1 minute later, at 2:11 PM, the volcano erupted, consuming almost everyone inside of the crater, sending steam and ash and acidic mist 2 miles into the air, followed immediately by another explosion that went horizontally, firing rocks and more acid and boiling steam in all directions. Of the 47 people that were still on the island when it erupted, 19 died instantly, and 2 more would succumb to their injuries later. These survivors required so many skin grafts that New Zealand put out a global order for 33.8 square meters, the equivalent of 16 bodies worth. One tourist named Alessandro Kaufman was on White Island that day. He was one of the tourists that was in one of the 5 groups of people that went out. He was in one of the boats, and he was one of the last people to get off right before it erupted, literally minutes before. And he was filming as his boat was loitering just offshore, waiting for the last 47 people to leave the island. Here's what he shot.
The crater lake level sat there for about 2 years, and in 2000.
Iniciamos às 10, são quase 2 horas da tarde, finalizando aqui. É isso, agora partiu pro continente. Man, look. Jeez. I don't know. Come on. Let's get off of here. Jesus.
The moment captured by Alessandro's camera marks just the beginning of a catastrophic chain of events. As the island trembled and the sky darkened with volcanic debris, the magnitude of the disaster unfolded in real time. Among the chaos, personal stories of fear, bravery, and survival began to surface. One such story is that of Matt and Lauren, a couple who found themselves in the very heart of danger. When they saw the black smoke up in the air, their guide started yelling for everyone to run. Rocks were raining down on people, and breathing got tough due to the poisonous cocktail of volcanic gases. That's when Matt and Lauren realized they might die right then and there. The couple took cover behind a rocky outcrop while burning ash rained down around them. Mrs. Barham held onto her husband tight, thinking if they had to go, they'd go together. After 2 minutes, the eruption subsided, even though it didn't last long. The island was in chaos. People closest to the crater were gone, some got buried in rocks, and some were poisoned by gases. The surviving tourists scrambled to get on a small inflatable boat to escape this hell and not wait for a rescue helicopter. The man helped his wife get on board using a ladder, but her hands kept slipping because her fingers had peeled off due to burns. They had to sail to the mainland for 90 minutes under the scorching sun with sea spray hitting them, making their burns even more unbearable. The couple's condition worsened, and eventually they both blacked out. The remaining time of their honeymoon was spent in hospitals located 1,000 kilometers apart. Mrs. Barham's respiratory tract was affected by inhaling ash, and 23% of her body was covered in burns. Her husband, on the other hand, suffered even more, with 54% of his body burned. Many others got injured in the catastrophe, like 25-year-old Stephanie Browett, whose body was 70% covered in burns. In total, 20 tourists lost their lives that day, and all because Royal Caribbean, the company that set up this trip, got wind of the danger well in advance, but still decided to brush it off. In fact, scientists had been warning for over 2 decades that frequent volcanic eruptions posed an obvious threat to the thousands who visit White Island every year. The company didn't bother telling passengers about the eruption frequency, as well as passengers probably didn't bother asking either. Last month, on March 1st, 2024, the long-awaited judgment was finally handed down. The Auckland District Court issued a landmark ruling that echoed through the corridors of New Zealand's tourism industry and beyond. In a decision that weighed heavily on the evidence of negligence and disregard for safety, the court ordered substantial compensation for the survivors and the families of those lost to the tragedy of White Island. The ruling targeted not just the tour operators, but also Wakari Management Leyte, which had been under scrutiny for its management practices. The court fined them $1.6 million and ordered them to pay an additional $6.2 million in compensation. This judgment was not just about financial retribution. It was a stark reminder of the responsibilities tour operators and property owners bear in ensuring the safety of their visitors. Thank you for watching this video. If today's story moved you, or if you have any thoughts about the balance between adventure and safety, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What do you think should be the limit for adventure tourism, especially in places known for their natural dangers? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the thrill of adventure was juxtaposed with real danger? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our content, which dives deep into the most incredible and often untold stories from around the globe. Your engagement helps us bring more such stories to light. Lastly, remember, while adventure calls to the spirit of many, safety should always come first. As we reflect on the lives tragically lost in this disaster, let's take a moment to honor their memory. We invite you to join us in sending thoughts, prayers, or messages of support to all those affected by the tragedy at White Island. We'll see you in the next video. Stay curious, stay safe.